But first, the poll this week suggesting that the Liberal Party could be reduced to just 2 seats in the West Australian Parliament doesn't just show how the pandemic is helping incumbents, it also shows that you don't win elections by agreeing with your opponents. Look, it was always going to be a huge gamble to entrust the leadership of the opposition to a 34-year-old rookie with no great record of personal achievement. A bloke who's barely been in the Parliament for 5 minutes, and while nice enough, I don't reckon he gets what the Liberal Party stands for. Not only did Zak Kirkup 100% back Premier Mark McGowan's quasi-separatist hard border closures, well, he then left his state and federal colleagues gob-smacked by proposing net zero emissions, not by 2050, but 2030. To prove his seriousness, Kirkup promised to close WA's only coal-fired power station by 2025. So that's in under 5 years' time, claiming that somehow renewables were going to deliver cheap, reliable power and jobs in the West, even though they've done precisely the opposite everywhere else. But instead of galvanising his campaign predictably, of course, this policy own goal just demoralised his supporters. Yesterday, he plunged them further into despair by declaring that the Libs could not win and begging them to vote Liberal to prevent a Labor landslide. This is what you get, isn't it, when you get a teenager to do an adult's job. It's what you get when the Liberal Party tries to be the Labor Party rather than itself. And that's to say, a party of the family, small business, empowered citizens and economic development. Repeated experience shows you don't win elections by mimicking the other side. You win elections by creating a contest, by showing voters how things would be different and better under you, thanks to a few key, clear policies that build on your party's values rather than rub up against them. Vague talk about ending waste and extravagance won't do it. Claims that you'll be a better manager, but you won't. That won't work. Voters have heard that all before and have been let down too often. And becoming Labor light, or in this case, becoming more Labor than Labor, on the grounds that you'll win votes from Labor while traditional Liberal votes supposedly have nowhere else to go, well, that just boosts minor parties, encourages informal votes and desertion by volunteers and Liberal donors. To show just how wrong that line is, that the Liberal voters have nowhere else to go, I'm sure you've heard that before. Let's have a look at 2016, that federal election. Malcolm Turnbull used that line. Well, Malcolm Turnbull barely hung on after losing 14 seats. To win elections, you have to show that the other side is doing wrong, and you have to explain what you'll do to make things better. On borders, for instance, why couldn't the Liberals have said that they were kept closed for far too long and taken up the countless cases of families separated and businesses harmed, playing to WA's keen sense of pride in being the nation's economic powerhouse? On lockdowns, for instance, why couldn't the Liberals have said that virtually imprisoning 2 million people on the basis of just one COVID case, as we saw a couple of weeks back, was an absurd overreaction from Premier, who's playing the politics for all it's worth so that voters don't look too closely at his record before the pandemic? On expert health advice, why couldn't the Liberals have said it should always be taken seriously, but it should never be mindlessly deferred to? And where it's as important to make a decision on the basis of health grounds, we've got to weigh it up against everything else. Mental health costs, people's jobs, the economy. Now, I'm not saying that elections can always be won, especially against first-term governments that still have a degree of goodwill. But elections always have to be fought. I've never seen a leader throw up the white flag as early as Kirkup, and frankly, I couldn't vote for him on this basis alone because politics is no place for a quitter. The problem here is that Zak Kirkup doesn't seem to be in lockstep with Liberal policy or values. I don't think I'm the only one with that view. Look at how carefully the PM himself is avoiding a trip to the West to campaign alongside Kirkup. And there's plenty of worried conversations in Canberra already. Let me tell you about what Kirkup's likely loss will mean for the Morrison government federally. Fundamentally, political parties define themselves by what they're for and what they're against. When the differences between you and your opponent are sharpened, when voters are given a clear choice. But when that all comes confused, parties and leaders lose their point. For the record, I doubt that the West Australian Libs will suffer quite the wipeout that's currently predicted in the polls. Voters don't normally want their parliaments too one-sided. But that said, the result won't be pretty. I think the best that can be said of Zak Kirkup at this stage is that he's certainly providing Liberal oppositions everywhere with an abject lesson in what not to do. He's got 2 weeks, hasn't he, to turn this left-leaning Liberal ship around? The big question is, can he and will he?